more online studies than I think we ever have done before, and certainly fewer in-person studies than we've ever done since we started. So what I want to do is think about methodological ideas and to share knowledge. And I'm really excited that uh, Becky, Barb, and Zab agreed to share some experiences they've had running online studies. I also wanted to just do sort of two quick things. One is to introduce the Wharton Behavioral Lab staff. I'm sure many of you know these people, but I suspect that many of you know them by sort of name rather than sort of face, and I wanted to try to connect those two things. So I wanted to do that, and I also wanted to give an update on the physical space, and I'll do that in just a minute. Um, but first, I wanted to introduce Mary and have Mary Spratt sort of give a shout out. So anybody that's run a study in the lab has interacted with Mary, and all of you have received emails from Mary. But this is who Mary is. So Mary is the head of the Wharton Behavioral Lab and is incredibly conscientious and careful and sort of keeps us all together. I don't know, Mary, do you want to say a quick
Thank you.
couple
Thank
of
you, Marie.
words?
That was lovely. I'm Mary. I'm the Senior Research Coordinator for the on-campus studies, which are now the online studies. I work very closely with Susan McCafferty, who I'm sure will be up next, who she also is, wonderful and takes care of all of the online things that we do. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, Sue. So Sue McCafferty is in charge of our online studies. Now everything's been moved online, so her plate's been overflowing. Sue, do you want to say a few words?
Sure. I do online studies, MCirc, Prolific, Qualtrics specialized panels. I run everything from marketing, and then I approve requests to run and do reimbursements for other departments. And I track all your spending.
Yeah, we need that. So thank you, Sue. Yeah, so Sue and Mary sort of work hand in hand, and now sort of even more so since everything's moved online. Montse has been running the physical lab and directing those studies and is now migrated to doing things online. Montse, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Montserrat Ganderas. I am the lab coordinator and I oversee all of what happens in the lab. I keep close communication with researchers, so you probably heard my name, to make sure that the studies run exactly as you designed them. And along with the part-time and student arrays, we make sure that the experiments run smoothly and consistently.
Thank you, Montse. And Sarah Cermoni, I don't know if you want to say a few words, but Sarah isn't under the umbrella of the Wharton Behavioral Lab, but still does an enormous amount of work running online studies as well. So I wanted to give a shout out. I just want to sort of thank the incredible staff that we have. We're going to hear also from Alec Lamont and Robert Botto, who support the technical work that we do, and it's really sort of that's where it's the combination of all of these efforts that have made the magic work. What I wanted to do very, very quickly is share just a quick update about the construction. As some of you may recall, we were building a new space, and as you'll see, it's it's not quite move-in ready. So the idea we have for the behavioral lab is is to build this new space. It's going to be in the basement of Steinberg Dietrich. So rather than the two physical labs that we have, one currently in Huntsman Hall and one in Steinberg Dietrich, we're going to have one space that's a little bit larger than the combined space of what we used to have. It'll have two 20-seat labs. It'll have a waiting room, which we never had before, a check-in and observation room, and 6 smaller breakout rooms, which I think will get a great deal of use. And we'll have the closed-circuit camera system monitoring for all the rooms. So the technology is going to be pretty exciting. Here's what that space looks like. And so we're going to have offices and sort of a copy room. We'll have those breakout rooms, and then we'll have, you can see that waiting room, the two labs, and then the check-in space as well. Here's what the current state looks like. So here's what the check-in room sort of window will be like. So participants will come in, sort of check in here. They'll wait in this space. As you can see, it's not exactly move-in ready, but they're forecasting that they'll be done in about a month and a half. In reality, we're unlikely to actually be in this space for months. Here's what the sort of the 20-seat lab room currently looks like. Here's what the breakout rooms, to give you a sense of that space. And so we're building, I think, a pretty exciting space, but that's for the future. What we have today is a focus on our online study. So without further ado, I'd like to kick this over to Alec Lamond. So what I'd like is, Alec and Robert are going to share some ideas about technology for the lab, and then we're going to hear from Becky, Barb, and Zab. So thanks so much, and then we'll have Q&A sort of as well. So thanks so much for coming. And Alec Lamond, who I've known almost my entire career here at the Wharton School, as he helped me early on, and he's now gone on to do bigger and better things.
I don't know about that, Maurice, but our work was unsurpassed, right?
Yeah.
Learning lab. Yeah, thanks, Maurice, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to all of you today. I'll keep it brief. Try to do just a quick overview of some research IT support services that you may not actually be aware of, although a number of you are, because I looked at the participant list, and we've worked with you in many ways. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen. Got a couple slides. And we'll go. All right. So my name is Alec Lamond. My title is Senior Director. My team is Research and Analytics. So what I'm going to try and do is explain what it is we do and how does that fit in with the behavioral lab. And I think the biggest point here is both the behavioral lab and what my team does are central school-supported resources to make you successful as researchers. And so we want to continue to work with you to do that. And I'll talk about a few of the ways that we do that and maybe some future ideas as well. So you all know the behavioral lab, Robert, who's part of my team. And that's a large part of what it is I focus on, but it's not the only thing. And so I'm not a researcher, I'm a technologist. So when I think about the research process, I have to think about it very generically in order to support it at a service level. So I think about gathering data, which is obviously behavioral lab, analyzing data, and then publishing based on that data. And so while the behavioral lab is prominent, there are 3 other teams in my group that also support research at the school. So we have research computing team, which runs our high performance compute environment as well as any cloud services. We have a research programming team that can help with web API coding, data engineering, and all kinds of Qualtrics or statistical programming. On the behavioral lab, you know what that does, and Robert's going to be talking about that a little bit more once I pass it over to him. And then we have a burgeoning analytics group that works on data warehouses, data engineering, and then analytic tools to allow the business units of the school to make better decisions about their areas. So it's not research support directly, but a lot of the techniques that are used in the analytics area are obviously applicable to the research side of the house as well. So those are the 4 teams. And we also have a number of partners around the school that we work with too. So Lippincott Library, I know you guys are familiar with them. Word Service, if you're into financial and accounting data, we work with them, and the Office of Research Services. So what we try to do as a team is we try to work with researchers. And if you come and you talk to the research computing team, and we can work with you, or we can help you connect to Lippincott Library, or we'll connect with Words to make sure that your needs are met. So what we try to do is take all of these units and present some sort of a united front or a service level back to the researchers. And at the same time, we try to make sure that what happens in the programming team gets shared with the computing team, so we're not reinventing the wheel constantly. So Robert comes to the research programming meetings every week to try and talk about things where he might be able to benefit from what they've done, or they might benefit from what he's done. And so the constant struggle for the team is to make sure that we're learning about all of the work that we're doing with you guys to make sure that the next time you come and ask us a question, hopefully we'll either remember the answer or we'll be able to have some code that we can change and make it successful for you. So that's the team. Research programming, just some idea as to the kind of work we're doing. We've worked with 65 researchers. This team is fairly new. It used to be 2 programmers embedded inside academic departments. So the marketing department had Sean Zamachek. Vincent Conley was the programmer for OID. We decided to pull them in, make them a central resource, and then added programmers to it. So now it's been about a year and a half. And so we've done 53 projects across the departments. 17% of that work was used in the behavioral lab in some way. So close to 20% of the work that we do is already being used in the lab. I'm happy to see that increase if that continues to make behavioral research move forward. And you can see the kind of work that we do. We do lots of Qualtrics, we do lots of JavaScript, Python, and then there's a count of departments. On the research computing side, just some stats on how much we actually do in terms of compute. So 500 active accounts, we've got over 3 million hours of total CPU time in the past year, 10% of which was run in the cloud, and that's going to continue to grow. So you can do on-prem stuff, or we can go as big as you need in the cloud, depending on your, obviously, budget constraints. And then just to give you, since we're in COVID times, this is a snapshot of usage during April 18th of 2019 versus 2020, and you can see we were pegged. So research actually got more intense, and the compute usage on the cluster during that first couple of weeks was quite high. In addition to all the online stuff that was happening, researchers were researching like crazy. So it's kind of interesting to see. So what's next for us? We're focused on data curation, reproducibility, as well as onboarding. We have Nancy Columbia recently joined the team to focus on data set acquisition. So we can help with, if you have a sticky data use agreement you need to negotiate, if you need to interface with Office of Research Services, we can help you with that. If you need to find a data set, we can try and help you with that. So reach out and we will see what we can do for you on that front. We do an on-demand Windows environment now as a service, so you don't have to buy a laptop. You can actually use a virtual server that might be, perfect for state data work, and you only need to use it for when you use it, and then you turn it off when it's not being used. We have a historical data store for Twitter data. We have an internal data warehouse. We're doing lots of dashboards, and we're focused on machine learning stuff as well. Another thing that we're focused on is, because I mentioned earlier that we're a central resource. And so my role in all of this is to set the strategy for the group, but also make sure that the school understands the importance of what it is we do for researchers. And so some of that is the metrics that I showed you: who we work with, how much do we work with them, what kind of projects we do. The final piece of that puzzle is tracking productivity on the research side. So in other words, if we know that we worked with 65 researchers and they produced N papers based on that work, we'd like to know what N is, because then I can turn around to the dean's office or senior leadership and say, look, this is how we are helping researchers be productive. And so that's something we're going to be focused on in the next year, is to try and gather that information. Not attribution, we're just looking for raw counts of published work. Some ideas for the future, we're looking at on-demand cloud queues, on-demand research environments, which I've discussed, lots of data engineering, data science, and secure data enclave could also be an area that we're going to go into. And so, like Maurice did with the behavioral lab, you know most of these people, if you work with them, usually via email. And so these are all the members of the teams. Robert's there on the left. So Douglas, John, Donna, Jim, Sean, Margaret, Nancy, Hugh, Jeremy, and Gavin are all there, and we're here to make your research successful. So finally, thank you for your time. Those two email addresses, you can reach out, or you can reach out to me directly, and we'll try to answer your questions. The URL there is our repository for all information about research IT. And that's it, I think. So we're going to do Q&A at the end. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then I'll be moderating those towards the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Robert. Robert, you ready to go?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yep, and I just stopped my share.
Then I think I won't show any slides. I'll just talk. My name is Robert Votto, for those of you who don't know me. I work for Alec. I also work for Maurice. I am responsible for all the technology in the behavioral lab. We've always been ambitious with technology, and I would say now more than ever, we need to be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the virtual Wharton Behavioral Lab, and I think I'll do it in something of a chronological fashion, how we responded to the stay-at-home order in March. The Behavioral Lab didn't go virtual overnight, though it was pretty close. So, and just talk about what about the lab worked well in this new environment, in this new research ecology, what had to change, and in what ways we're just different now, and for better and worse, but mostly for better, I think. So back in March, of course, we all dramatically shifted the way we do our work. And our first goal was just, how do we minimize this disruption and get all of your research running online as quickly as possible? And I think it was we had about 2 weeks of downtime between shutting down our in-person lab and getting stuff running online. The way we did that is we have our own participant management and experiment management system built in-house. If you're from another institution, you might be familiar with Stone or one of the other systems. We have our own, which actually allows us to be a little more flexible, and I can add features to it and write code and turn that around pretty quickly. Rather than try to build out a whole system, what I decided to do was leverage what Qualtrics was able to provide in terms of experiment management and participant management as well, and sort of integrate that into our system. So that allowed us to move just very quickly, and almost in sort of a modular way, where we say, Qualtrics, these are your concerns, here are our concerns, and that worked well. I mean, obviously Qualtrics is something that most of us are very familiar with. Now, our staff really did have to accelerate their training there. All of their jobs have become a lot more technical since we've gone online, and I really admire how quickly they've come up to speed doing this. So, we were content at first, through those first couple weeks, with just having that level of success. Though I will admit we were cherry picking a little bit what experiments were out there. If something was a little challenging, didn't quite fit, we might have said to you, we're going to push you down the road a little bit. We're just doing like the easy stuff. We lost a little bit of our ability to handle like complexity. But we got moving and we had some experience and we gained traction. And so that's, I think, the sort of phase one of our becoming a sort of virtual lab. And then I guess if there's a second phase, it's how do we respond to the challenges that came up originally? How do we accomplish those more challenging studies? How do we continue to add automation? Automation is great. It allows us to do these things with high data quality, high replicability and everything, but there's a big technical debt to doing that. It takes a lot of time to roll something out. So we have to manage, is this something we can best do by writing software for a few weeks or by having a bunch of people just kind of manually, and we're still in that sort of a hybrid mode there. And I think a lot of labs are. Certain things, certain sort of like interactivity, how do we reintroduce that? Something like Blue Jeans or Zoom is really been using Zoom is the way we've been adding participant interaction to experiment design. We only really just started doing that, and that's something we learned is hard to automate. You really do need a lot of people still involved and RAs who are trained in clicking buttons, moving people around, reciting protocol, anything like that we that you might want to do as a researcher in a virtual room environment. So that was something that took us a little longer to get working. Other things that were a challenge, participant identity. Bringing new people on board has always been you create an account online, you come into our lab, but you come to our lab and we sort of glance at your ID or something, confirm who you are. So we've had to sort of increase our security and screening from a technical side to just ensure that we have a panel of real people who are doing experiments only once and all of that. So that's been a challenge that we had to address right away. Also, how do we distinguish ourselves too? Like you heard Mary say, she's the in-person coordinator and Sue's the online. Now that we're all online, the distinction is really our panel. We all work with online, and all these other panels, whether they're prolific or if you want to treat MTurk or some other marketplace like that as a panel. How do we distinguish our service and our panel from the rest? And we're still working on that. And other things. And there's other things we lost. We lost a lot of the ability to do the more high-touch research, whether that's physiological recording or eye tracking or with, I don't know, taste or food or something. Some of that I don't know that we'll ever regain in a virtual environment, but other things we might come up with sort of analogs for. So moving into maybe where we are now is really how do we use this to our advantage? And there's a lot of opportunities online. That interactivity, for example, once we're comfortable with the platform, recording is actually really easy, and we can do more of it at, I think, at a higher scale, at a faster pace than we could do. In fact, Alec mentioned being able to spin up like on-demand Windows services, and we have been doing that to spin up some of the analysis software that we will then run on, say, video recording to do like affect or motion analysis and things like that. So we're getting there, and we're starting to pilot a lot of that. I don't want to go on too much longer, but there's just a lot more that I think we can do with this ecology. I think building a richer participant data set in general, like we know a lot about our panel, and I think that being able to share what's relevant to the rest of you could be really important. Building more experimenter tools into our system to allow you to look into your past research, to link research projects together to experiments, to and just knowing more about who this panel is that you are running your experiment. And anything else to really up? And we might have a future. We saw our space being built. There might be some hybrid lab sometime in the future, months from now, where we can run some of those higher touch things in person, but still maintain mostly an online. Be determined by a lot of factors. With that, I think hand it back to whoever is moderating or straight to our speakers.
I think we're going to the next speaker, right?
Great.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yep.
All right, I believe the next
Becky.
speaker
Is
is me.
It's
That
Becky.
is
Yes.
Becky.
Can you guys hear me?
Becky, you're it. Yes.
Great. Hello. I will be sharing my screen here in just a minute. I just want to take a note to say that I think what I'm going to try to do in this presentation is just go through an example of an experience that I had about trying to take a task that normally would be done in person and bring it to the virtual environment. This was something I actually did prior to COVID, but had to do it for the very issues of scale and efficiency that Robert had discussed. And this is where I actually learned that by figuring out how to take a physical task and move it online, that it opened up a lot more possibilities than I had realized originally, or was limited by through sort of in-person interactions. I just want to say, do you guys see a screen that says quick survey tips that saved hours, weeks of my life?
Yes.
Great. And that really is sort of the theme of this presentation. Give me 1 second to set up. So as I go through this, there are a number of tips that I've learned throughout being a research assistant, then through my PhD program, and then of course here through the Wharton Behavioral Lab. And many of the tips that I have learned have actually been through people seeing me do things and then asking why I was doing things in such an inefficient way. And so as I share some of the tips that I've learned about moving this physical task online, I just want to thank Scott Weltermuth, who is a friend of mine from grad school and a colleague from USC, Anish Ra, and Sam for passing on their tips, which they will see here, because it is through the collaboration and how we learn sort of these skills with Qualtrics and whatnot, is through exact forums like this, which is really asking each other. So I'm going to give sort of a narrative account of this project that I faced. And here was the roadblock that I experienced, which I was studying creativity, and I had to get hundreds of people to complete a creativity task that involved drawings. I then had to get thousands of these drawings rated by 5 or plus different people each, with the images being evenly and randomly presented to all raters. This was sort of the parameters of the roadblock that I faced. And I think when we think about normally doing stuff in the lab, this was going to be a challenge, even though it would be helpful because people can physically draw in the lab. Just getting that level of scale in order to have the power that I needed to test some of these predictions was not going to be tenable. So I had to figure out how to move this online to be able to leverage platforms such as Mechanical Turk and Prolific Academic. In describing this narrative account, I'm trying to talk about how I'm sort of metaphorically hiked around this roadblock. And I think a caveat I want to say is I am not super technical. So this is what I consider to be a bit of a hack to how to solve this problem. And as you guys watch this, if you know of a better way to be able to solve a problem like this, please let me know. Because again, this is all about how to save sort of days and weeks of your life by learning these various tips. So the other parameter here was why I wanted to run this task, which involved a physical task of having online participants do physical drawings and then take photographs of these drawings, was because I was also looking for a task in which I could assess creativity where people would not be able to cheat. This becomes a challenge with a lot of common creativity tasks, such as the remote associates task, that are so widely used that non-naivety is a problem and the answers are available online. And so having to think about creative ways to be able to manage that issue. In going through this narrative account, I hope to just sort of briefly talk about completing a physical task online, what I'm going to call the life-saving magic of text to columns and columns to text in Excel, and using hidden questions and loop and merge to facilitate the coding of stimuli using online raters. So the first step that I found in this project was how do I get the drawings? This actually proved to be more seamless than I would have imagined. Just through sort of thinking the experience of participants and the different issues they might face, really I just went through and was like, you're going to have to draw an alien, and then you're going to have to take a picture of the alien, and then you're going to have to upload that picture to Qualtrics. That turned out to actually work relatively well, and so I won't go into many of the details about that. But then I got into this second step, which was about how to code the drawings. Basically, how do I get those images that participants generated to other MTurk workers to be able to rate their creativity? And here, like, I wasn't quite sure the best way to depict this, and I won't go through all of this in close detail, but I basically just kind of recorded everything that had to go into being able to do that. So just so you can see here as we watch this, like the first question is, here is every file that participants in one of these studies uploaded. This is every image that they uploaded of an alien, which you can find in here. Basically, if you go to export data, you can go into this user submitted files and export an entire zip file, which you get here. And I'm not going to go into all of the images, but here are just 4 of the images that people rated, creating a file where we have these 4 alien drawings. And now, what you can always see is each of these drawings corresponds to one of these files. And I want to say, how do we have to get this URL. We're going to have to get a URL here in Qualtrics for the drawing in order to be able to embed that for people to see. But here, normally you could just copy the URL. But this is where it becomes hard when you want to try to scale, because I'm not about to copy 997 of these different URLs that are associated with each picture. So I had to figure out a way to be able to automate this whole process. And what I noted was that there's this individual sort of unique code associated with each image. And so it was just a matter of trying to figure out where you can find those individual unique codes. If you go to your account settings, this is an amazing trick that saved weeks of my life. Go to Qualtrics IDs and this handy little button that says My Library, and you scroll down to find all of the images. This is a list of every image I've ever run in a study. I can go down here and find those images of these first 4 images that people uploaded. And I get this code right here, which allows me to identify that individual image. And now what's nice here, I'm just going to pause this for a second to show that now what I have here is the file name, I have the image code, and the only thing then I also needed was to be able to get participants' response ID. And we know the magic of participants' response ID in Qualtrics surveys because that's what allows us to track them through different parts of the study. Their file always has the first part of their response ID. But then it also tags on this other information that the participant has included, such as the title of the file. And so to automate as a way to get their text ID, this is the magic of text to columns, where I just have to basically separate this file name in order to be able to create a response ID. There you sort of there, and then the magic, I can't tell you how much this has always saved my life, of then going from columns to text. And so then I can basically create this response ID. And now this is great. So here I have the response ID, I have the image ID, I have their file name, and I have a code that I generated. And so now the next thing I just need to get is I need to get their URLs. And as I said before, you could do this by copying and pasting 997 URLs, but that is ridiculous or way too time consuming. And so what you note is with every URL, it all shares a similar first part. The only thing that's different is the image ID. And so you can go back and using the same text to columns, columns to text, be able to automate this so that you can basically create automatically every URL for every image. And this is phenomenal because you can do it, doesn't matter how many stimuli you have, how many images you have, you can automatically create that. And so now I have every information you have, you can test it out. So here is one of the images. This is one of the aliens that a participant drew. And now I have all of the information I would need in order to get all of this stimuli rated. I have the URL and I have the response ID. And now I just set up this example, go back here, an example rating task to just show you what I did here. Because this was actually a trick that, thank you to Anish Ra for figuring this out, because I wanted a subsample of all of these evenly presented to each rater. So imagine I have 997 images. I want each rater to rate 5. And I want each of those images rated a similar amount of times. that evenly presented is not something you can actually do in loop and merge. And the advice I got from Qualtrics when I called them about how to do this was, I quote, to get friends over to my house and buy them beer to create 900 individual blocks in the survey flow relating to each image. And I was like, that's not possible. That's not going to happen. So by creating this hidden variable, which is automatically going to select some of these images, you can watch this video later to see how that connects to the loop and merge function. And then when we go into loop and merge, we have each of our different images. We can upload that automatic image, the automatic information we have, which is the URL, as well as the response ID. And then if we go back to the survey, you can see here the survey that participants took. This also shows a way that I like to show text in blocks, which is participants read each part, and then they have to click to read more, just to modulate how much, if anybody, reads at any time. Passing a reading check comprehension, which I always allow 2 opportunities for participants to be able to try to complete that. And now if we go back, here are our rating tasks. We have our unique ID, so we know which image is associated with which people are rating. And then we have that same image we saw previously. And that's it. And obviously we're going to be doing questions at the end, but I'm just going to leave that there. This has been, figuring this out, I have now rated so many stimuli. It's changed the way that I've actually thought about doing research, having figured out this way of being able to leverage the online environment to be able to get physical things, and then also to be able to get people to do ratings. It took a task that might take weeks for RAs to be able to code, and to now I can do it in a few hours, thanks to the help with the WBL. And with that, I will pass it on to the next person.
All right, I think that's me.
Yep, that's you, Zeb.
Excellent. Hold on. Let me try and share my screen. All right. So, yeah, so I mean, I think I run with this very similar kind of theme as Becky, and also, you know, what Robert also touched on, which is that when we got sort of thrown into the mix, we really had to think about how to leverage this as an opportunity instead of as an obstacle, and you know, how do we use this kind of a situation to change our own experimental practices in a way that will eventually be really gainful, I think, for us on the flip side. So, so I'm not going to be as methods driven as Becky was, mostly because we are in fact still working very hard at our methodologies, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. But I'll take you through a little bit of, you know, of our decision process for this particular study. This particular study is one of many in the portfolio for the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative. So instead of an independent faculty member's work, this is actually sort of center-led work. And to highlight that, I want to also express very much that this is a team project, and I am very much sort of the messenger here. But this is a project that we're doing in collaboration with a lot of people. And of course, you know, it's led by Michael Platt, the faculty director for the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, and very heavily is involved are 3 amazing postdocs, well, 2 amazing postdocs and 1 former postdoc who's now an independent faculty member. Scott Rennie and Vera Ludwig are really running with most of the details of the study, and Sharika is someone that was in sort of involved in earlier iterations of this work that I'll touch on a little bit, but those were sort of in-person components of what the study was. And then we have a number of now working remotely undergraduate students who are also very active contributors to the project. And you know, one of the things that we're really interested in is thinking about group decision making and team dynamics, and how we can use things like neuroscience to help amplify that. And I just wanted to start with this because I actually stumbled upon this quote on LinkedIn, and I thought that this is sort of where we were in the state of what we're thinking about with a lot of what the current situation has done with work. Which is that, you know, people sort of anecdotally say that that when you work away from others, you can't form as much trust and people are less efficient at working with each other. But we're sort of stuck with this as anecdotal evidence. And of course, we are scientists, so we really wanted to try and put metrics onto whether this is just anecdote and intuition, or if there is really something to it. I'm not going to talk today about trust building or anything like that. I'm going to, but I just wanted to sort of highlight that this is a perpetual issue. So the task that we actually use in our studies, and these have been largely done in person, is called the hidden profile task. This is a behavioral task that was first devised by Gerald Stasser and William Titus in the mid-1980s. So it's been around for a really long time. And it's, where you put a group of people together and they're tasked to discuss, possible options for a group decision. For example, like determining the best possible candidate for a job. But there are many, many iterations. And of course, in the 35 years that this task has been around, it's really, there have been many, many measures and correlations made. So it's a really nice, actually, team behavioral metric to be using. Unbeknownst to the participants, they're given information ahead of time. And some of that information is common information that's shared amongst all of the group members. But each individual also has unique information that only they have. And each person gets their own set of information that they can take notes on. And then this information disappears and they go into this discussion. So participants are relying on their own notes and not just comparing their information sheets to sort of determine what they're trying to get accomplished. And ideally, the task is designed so that the common information favors a suboptimal decision alternative, and that the team members really have to come to the point of sharing the unique information that only they have to lead them to the optimal consensus. And it's been well documented that groups that that rapidly share their unique information tend to reach consensus more quickly, and they also tend to reach the optimal consensus. Now, the sort of relative ratios of the shared and unique information are all variables that that people have studied, and this is well documented. But I just wanted to sort of let you know sort of the general task framework, not that we are the people that devised this. And of course, it allows us to get pre and post surveys afterwards that quantify people's experiments too. They're experimental aspects of an experience. But of course, we're really interested in neuroscience. So for our team-based projects, we've been adding biometrics, neurometrics, and physiological recordings, right, to measure things like team synchrony in this kind of task. This is stuff that hasn't been done. And our pilot data prior to the pandemic suggested that that things like heart rate tend to synchronize when groups reach correct consensus than groups that don't reach the correct consensus or don't ever reach consensus. And that the synchrony, only occurred in the active group task. It doesn't happen when they're all seated together, not working on the group decisions. That's sort of exciting pilot information that we had, and I just wanted to highlight, right, that that you get lots of measurements from this kind of a task. We're adding the neurometrics on there. Thanks in large part to what the behavior lab allows us to do. But you also get information about like the time that it takes to share information to reach the consensus, whether or not it's the right or wrong consensus. And then of course you can get all kinds of survey related information. So you can get information about which participants said what information, the rate that people are sharing information, which information is shared. Did particular group members draw out information from others? Who were the people that seemed to share the most information? Who was most cooperative? Were there any indications of leadership? How was leadership? How could you exactly, quantify leadership, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really like, it's pretty boundless as a task. This actually is what we got thrown into, with the coronavirus. So our teamwork now, both in practice and what we're doing right now, right, looks a lot more like this. And it's no longer it was no longer possible for us to study in-person group work in the Wharton Behavior Lab. So what we sort of thought about pretty deeply was, how can we leverage this kind of an opportunity to tell us something really, really valuable and interesting about how groups might function either similarly or different when they are no longer together physically, and also not just together physically, but over these kinds of platforms like BlueJeans and Zoom, and that allowed us to sort of think about, can we study group decision-making and group interactions during social distancing, and also do it in this context where there are going to be these virtual WBL restrictions. And so what I would like to highlight is that I think it is possible. And so we moved to this next iteration of the work we tried to be as rapid as we could. So we devised a Zoom hidden profile task. And what we quickly realized, right, is that there are a bunch of benefits for being able to do this. You can select participants from anywhere in the world. They're not necessarily just the people that are around at Penn or part of the WBL's existing panel. And so you can start to think about diversifying the team makeup in a really interesting way. We can use online studies, right, to select specific participants on the basis of specific kinds of survey outcomes, and that can be relatively more straightforward in this context. And then, I think critically for us, we also wanted to sort of figure out how to really leverage video conferencing as a context to do different kinds of measures. And so in this case, it's helping to get automated facial action coding that can be indicators of shared attention, whether people are actually responding to one another in a directly quantifiable way. And of course, we get separate audio recordings for each participant, which makes it much more straightforward to quantify how much time people are spending speaking or turn taking, et cetera, and the kind of language, in fact, that they can use as well. So we saw that as a benefit. And what we realized, of course, is that this is even more ideal because it allowed us to do something, hopefully over time, that will be really interesting, which is a comparison of video conferencing and real world hidden profile tasks that will really allow us to do a much, much better job of precisely quantifying the impact of remote interactions on teamwork, as well as its biological basis. So this is sort of our ideal as we're moving forward, which is that we are running these studies now where people are anywhere and they're just logging in to a shared video conferencing platform monitored by research assistants. But of course, what we'll move to, hopefully, in a phased-in phase is to conduct Zoom hidden profile tasks, but in the Wharton Behavior Lab eventually. So there may still be separation requirements. So we might not be able to throw everybody into those shared, beautiful new conference rooms that Marie showed at the beginning, but that this would really allow us to then still do some of the higher touch components of the study, like the collection of synchronized neural and physiological recordings, while still physically separating our participants from each other and still having them do this over a video conferencing platform. And so what I wanted to sort of stress in my presentation was that we really tried to think very deeply about how to leverage this in a sort of phased in projection, so that the sort of what we're thrown into now is a Zoom hidden profile task, which allows for collecting data during very, very, virtual restrictions, but that hopefully there may be a time in the coming months where we can do in-house Zoom, which would allow for the addition of physiological recordings during moderate social distancing. And then, eventually we will get to that point where then we can compare that again to real world group conference room table, physically together experiences. And that instead of seeing this as suboptimal, we can actually think of this as a win-win-win. A slight pun intended, since the word neuroscience acronym is WIN. During the pandemic, by continuing to sort of use an experimental paradigm, which allows us to really understand something very critical about how people work and how people are going to work in the future. So what we think is that remote teamwork is not going to disappear at any time after social distancing ends. It's here to stay. But we don't yet know its specific impacts, except for, as I sort of began the presentation with, the sort of anecdotes and intuition that people have. So what we want to do is sort of use this as an opportunity to determine how we might make both in-person and remote teamwork more effective, and understand some of the challenges and opportunities that diverse teamwork will have in the future. So that's my presentation.
Cool. Thanks, Zab. If you have questions, remember to put them in the chat and we will get to them later. But I think now we go to Barb, who is our final scheduled speaker for today. Barb?
Yeah, just 1 second. Okay. Can you see my screen all right?
Yep.
Good.
It's good.
Okay. All right. Well, I can't say enough good things about the Work and Behavior Lab. When I first came here, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, experimental heaven or something, because I had never seen experiments made so easy. And really, I cannot thank you people enough for doing this for us and hanging in there through this strange period of COVID. I'm very interested in how groups work, and I've watched lots of groups interact asynchronously, and I've gotten very interested in what it is that makes a group function well. And let's see here. Now, how groups function well. And along with Ike Silver, I started a huge project on the following question. What are the variables that predict whether or not groups will benefit, in this case, meaning become more accurate from a discussion? Now, whenever we try to solve a problem, we often form groups, and sometimes it's essential, like putting a helicopter on Mars, but sometimes it can be very harmful and result in groupthink and hurting and bullying and all kinds of things. So we started with a very simple question. We wanted to work with forecasting, but instead we chose, we didn't want to wait for the events to resolve, so we chose estimates of unknown quantities. And here's some examples. What is the population of Canada? What is the distance between Reykjavik and Nairobi? What are the stock prices of Twitter or Chipotle just prior to our data collection? What was the year in which the printing press was invented? So you can see there's populations, distances, stock prices, and historical dates. So those were the stimuli. And over the course of, 12 months, Ike and I ran 969 face-to-face conversations in the Wharton lab. The groups were roughly 4 people, and I will tell you what the best predictor of beneficial group discussion was, because I want to get that question out of the way and tell you how we did it. So what we found was this. The best predictor is what we called collective confidence calibration. And by that, I mean the correlation between confidence and accuracy within a group. So accuracy is just the absolute difference between the estimate and truth. And confidence was a rating that they made about how sure they felt that their answer was right. So what is collective confidence calibration? Here's what it is. When more accurate members, the people who are more accurate, are also more confident, and the less accurate group members are less confident, that is when groups are more likely to become more something. I don't know, more accurate, I think I said. Why? Well, confidence is acute knowledge. So when it's aligned with accuracy, group members are more likely to pay attention to the right people. That's basically, in short, the shortest I can give you on what we found. Now let me give you some more details on how we did this. Okay, I took this picture from Ike, and it's just a little summary of how the experiment worked. We brought people into the lab. They looked at, got into cubicles, answered a set of questions. For example, what is the total population of Uzbekistan? And then rate your subjective confidence along with other things. Then they discussed their estimates and tried to improve on them. And finally, they went back out into their cubicle and made an independent post-discussion estimate of whatever the question was, population of Uzbekistan. So let me tell you a little bit more about the gory details. This was all done with the Wharton Behavior Lab, which we ended up quickly exhausting. And then we had people doing the experiment with different questions and different partners and so forth. People came into the lab, and the first thing we did was to take their cell phones away during the session to prevent them from looking up the answers. Well, this was traumatic for some people, so it doesn't work for everyone. Then we sorted them into groups randomly of about 4 and let them introduce themselves to each other. After that, we gave them a series of estimation questions and followed exactly the same procedure for each question. First they went to their cubicles, made their best initial independent estimate and rated their confidence in it. Then they moved their chairs into a circle to confer in groups, and they were given 3 to 4 minutes to discuss each question. They were not required to reach consensus, and how they interacted within their group was left entirely up to them. Finally, they returned to their cubicles, made a final post-conversation estimate, and rated their confidence a second time. one thing that happened for almost every single one of those 969 groups was that they became more confident after discussion than before, regardless of whether the group had or the group discussion had helped or hurt or had no effect. So they thought they were getting something out of the conversation. So then the question is, when is the average final estimate more accurate than the average initial estimate? And the answer to that question is what I told you earlier, collective confidence calibration. Okay, now we finished that experiment and we're doing several others that came off of it. One of the questions that we're very interested in is this one. We're interested in how the best way to structure discussions about forecasts in the context of reasons. So when people make forecasts in small groups, what is the best way to structure that conversation to generate the most accurate forecast? So here's an example. Will Trump win the 2020 US presidential election? Okay, what we want to do is get people to share reasons. We want to crowdsource reasons for and against the event. I'm going to move this thing again here. And then participants will independently generate reasons in categories of for and against the event and make an initial forecast. So they'll do that on their own. The next thing is that we want them to go into a chat room where suddenly all the reasons from all group members will appear in the chat in categories of for and against. Then what we want is for participants to rate the importance of all the reasons and display the reasons in order of most important to least important for both of the categories, for and against. Then participants will have time to discuss the reasons and their forecast, and eventually they'll leave the chat room and make a final independent forecast. Okay, now how in the world can we do this? This is the big question. Are aggregates of the initial forecast more accurate than those of the final forecast post-discussion? Well, this wasn't possible to do. Well, we weren't able to do this in the Wharton Behavior Lab, and we still aren't, but to perform exactly this kind of group interaction for us. It should be ready in a couple of weeks. And it's a really nice way to have discussion begin independently and then move into a chat room where people share what they've written with others, and then discuss and go back out and make more independent judgments. So I'm super grateful that the Wharton Behavior Lab has decided to develop this for me. Once again, I still think I've died and gone to experimental heaven. And I just want to say thank you, you guys, so much for doing all of this for us. And I'll stop here.
That's great, Barb. Thanks. I guess we'll open up for questions. I guess you can raise your hand, you can put it in chat, or you can just turn on your mic and ask any of our speakers a question that you have.
So I had just a quick question for the professor who just spoke concerning the research on confidence and how it can relate to effectiveness of groups. I'm just wondering if there was any metric concerning overconfidence of some participants, because that tends to be an issue for a lot of participants, especially in creating different accurates and estimates. I'm just wondering to what extent that was a factor in group decision making, if it was at all.
We had overconfidence in our estimates, and the measure that we used, that we developed to predict beneficial discussion, wasn't sensitive to the level of confidence. It was just sensitive to the connections between confidence ratings and accuracy. So they could be high or low, didn't really matter. The correlation coefficient's insensitive to additive constants. So that was nice, but I'm sure that it's beneficial to become more calibrated, and I think that's one of the things we'll do next, to look at whether those kinds of tips help people become more collectively calibrated.
Thank you.
Zab, I wonder if I could ask you to describe a bit, and maybe Robert, I think you were also involved with this, about the facial affect coding. So how are you able to do that from the videos? You talked about cropping them and coding them.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'll let Robert weigh in too, but the, the nice thing is that you can sort of create a mask. So if everybody is in a grid and it's roughly 4, right, then you can actually do the post processing offline individually. But then the heroics are then to correlate, the timing across all of the videos. And of course, I think facial action coding and its reliability are already problematic to some degree of interpretation. But I think that the kinds of metrics that we're most interested in are things like shared expression. So we don't necessarily care about the actual, necessarily the emotion that someone is feeling, but whether or not people tend to smile at the same time to a comment, or look concerned, or look off the screen. Those kinds of
I can jump into. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, everything Zab said. I support. We can do. I think actually all the videos coming from a single source in some ways helps us in synchronization, because individual video sources often have time differences and anomalies of their own. So I think that this will. I have a high degree of confidence we'll be able to get something from this. Now there are resolution issues which will make the identifying of very smaller, very unique facial action activations harder to identify, but I think the larger behavioral ones will be easy. And there's lots of tools we can use to do the sort of masking that Zab mentioned. And then we're using some of the tools that Alec had mentioned to build up that sort of online research server environment where we can do all of this work collaboratively. Actually, I had a question based on something Becky said, and also something Barb mentioned, and that is the issue of trust and cheating with, especially in a virtual environment, and how heavy-handed you think anti-cheating measures should be from something like the Board and Behavioral Lab, or from your experimental designs, what you think can be done, and how big a problem you feel this might be.
So I can say, I think, I am concerned about cheating. I think Sam has done some great work about sort of how people think about Mechanical Turk, how they think about that work. And I would say, like, oftentimes, like, I don't know as a participant, if I'm online and you ask me for something and I search it on the web, is that cheating or not? Like, it's a really interesting question. Anything that I can do on the back end to minimize that from ever happening, or any judgment calls on my part about whether somebody's cheating or not, I try to do. One thing, and I don't know if this is something to scale, is, as you guys know in the lab, I sometimes maintain a list of participants who I know have passed kind of like human checks before. Maybe they've submitted, even using this, like, you've submitted a drawing. Like, I don't expect that you've cheated, or you've done some data entry for me. And so I have some sense that you're interacting earnestly with the task. And then even if the next follow-up study is completely unrelated, I might survey people who I already know have shown some level of engagement with the task and proven themselves to be like a real engaged participant. That has helped one way to preserve data quality without having to embed a lot of checks within the survey, which also I think can disrupt sometimes maybe the psychological experience you're trying to create for participants. So anything that I can do, like, ahead of time or just to make it hard to cheat, I think it's a problem. I also think, but in addition to cheating, like, non-naivety for something like these creativity tasks is a huge predictor of their performance on it. So that's nothing that we can do. It's just that, we have a limited number of tasks. So all of the things that people are suggesting about novel ways to study these paradigms is fantastic.
And then in terms of data quality and maybe participants whom you've identified as particularly good or not, how important or willing would you be to share that information? I mean, I think that's something that not every individual researcher should have to do on their own. And I do feel like a richer set of sort of metadata around our panel would be beneficial to everybody. And I think that one of our priorities as a lab should be to make it easier for you to report that kind of information back to us to share with everyone in our community.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, absolutely. It doesn't make sense for each individual person to be doing that. I don't know, so I feel like I shouldn't speak too affirmingly about this, what the human subjects restrictions would be in terms of sharing that information across researchers. If that were not a concern in terms of any sort of privacy or what participants are agreeing to, I think it would be phenomenal to be able to aggregate all of the things that we do individually as researchers into a more collective experience where we can know more about the participants that we all sort of, it's weird to say use, that feels the wrong term, invite to participate in our studies.
I mean,
So,
I sort of,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Well,
Go
just to
ahead,
follow up,
Maurice.
I've been eager when we drop participants for failing comprehension checks or attention checks. I would like to have that repository for the Wharton Behavior Lab so that we know, if Barb is dropping a participant and Zab is dropping a participant and I'm dropping a participant, hey, if that's the same participant, maybe we should be excluding that participant from future studies. And rather than, letting, Samir go ahead and, try his luck with that participant, I think we could do better. And to Robert's point, I'd like to create this easy to use sort of portal so that we can share that information. I mean, Becky, you're talking about like getting, really good subjects, and maybe that would be also really useful to have. I've been more concerned for the really, I mean, for the sort of tail end of things that we don't want.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just want, great discussion. We do have there are a couple of questions in chat, one which Zab already answered. So if you're interested in seeing her answer, take a look. But Samir actually is asking, I guess this is for everybody, that he's been having mixed experiences with MTurk and cloud research since COVID-19, although there's a few filters coming out to help with bots there. Other than Prolific and Qualtrics, are there other platforms that people are using and finding work well right now? Or are there any other best practices or tips you can share to help them? So I guess that's an open floor question for everybody.
Prolific it is.
There we go.
Answered. Thank you.
So this is Sigal here. I keep hearing, I mean, I'm sort of in a similar place. I keep hearing, I should pay more attention to what the names are, but from like that there are these kind of mystical places that are much better than the land of Qualtrics and in the sense of getting, good participants. And so given that nobody on this call is kind of jumping to say, oh yeah, I love this one, maybe it's just idiosyncratic. I'm going to take that. Wow, this is a conversation stopper.
Well, I mean, I'd say prolific. I think prolific has been better than MTurk, though it's actually a little bit surprising because there are actually many people that are on both platforms. But I think
and
more
we've had
recently,
some good luck with MTurk Prime. Actually. And one interesting thing, just for you guys to know, if you're worried about pre-COVID and post-COVID responses, I'm working on an emotional intelligence test, and it's an ability test. So it's something that is arguably, less prone to kind of what somebody is feeling at the time or whatever. And we coincidentally had done a validation before COVID. We needed to do another one after. We did the exact same thing, and there were no significant differences. So I found that actually to be really heartening. I mean, I'm not saying what that signals to me is that if there are differences pre and post COVID that have theoretical value, like anxiety, that they are likely meaningful. And there's something I would not have expected to be different was not, and was solidly not. It wasn't even trending. So just a happy thought to those of us who are trying to do non-COVID pre and post research.
Awesome. Thanks, Sigal. There's about 12 minutes left, so get your questions in now.
So Becky, I think you have such a nice example of how you troubleshot a question. I mean, your own method, and you now have this nice video to share, which is great. But I mean, I was totally shocked to hear that the Qualtrics team couldn't come up with that solution, and it makes me wonder, like, how many of these things could we be sharing as a community that could be searchable or archived in some ways. I mean, I think even the number of times that we end up having students ask questions about design, experimental design in whatever platform, it's definitely not a streamlined system. And I think not just that's not a question necessarily to Becky, but to the whole group about, like, can we do a better job of starting to put these kinds of things so that people don't have to find it on their own or ask all of their friends and neighbors, or even continually harass the IT team for suggestions and help.
I love that suggestion. Even for this presentation, going through and sort of recording what I did was helpful for me because I sort of forgot the steps. Like, I got stuck on the same problems that I got stuck on previously. And so much of the knowledge about how we learn these sort of workarounds between these platforms is through this hallway interaction, me hassling people in their cubicles to ask them things, which we know now is more limited. But I was thinking, even as I, putting this video together, I was like, man, is there a place we could upload these tips, or like, hey, I just solved this problem. I mean, War in IT already has some really phenomenal resources on the web about Qualtrics. Like, I don't know if there's a way to build that out, but just absolutely I think more now than ever, this sort of needing to be more formal about the way we or institutionalizing the sharing of best practices.
Yeah, so I love that idea. And like Robert, I might and Alec, like, ask you, like, can we create a folder on our website for, researcher resources that would have things like, Becky's video.
But yeah, well, so Wharton, Alec's team in general does have like a blog sort of format that where research developers and myself will sometimes share exactly what, the sort of a project like what Becky described, and formalize it into like a how-to that's very easy to follow with lots of descriptions. Of course, that's time consuming. It's hard to take. It's hard to like know when to like stop, put a pin in that project, generalize it, and then spend a day, half a day writing it up. So it does lag a little bit, but it is there. I believe it's on the research. It's on the support.wharton. Is that right, Alec?
It's research-it.
It's
That Wharton, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's where all the information about also the high performance computing environment
Yep.
and all of that is there, but also the Qualtrics specific content is growing there, though it does tend to be very specific about like this project, how we solve this problem. And I think making it more general is better. I do, as somebody who does a lot of Qualtrics support, it's a moving target. Qualtrics adds and removes features and things, and so I don't want to like invest too much time in writing support that really Qualtrics themselves should have. But when we identify something like that, we do try to write it up.
Right. And I'd be all for expanding this. So we have the same problem on the tech side, right? So we want to make sure that we're sharing best practices and not recreating the wheel whenever possible. But it sometimes bleeds into the design side of the house. And so it'd be nice to actually have a place where a lot of that stuff lives together. So I'd be more than happy to work with people to at least have a place where this sort of content can go and then share it out with the community. And Sigal asked if we're going to be posting this session there. Sigal, I'm pretty sure we'll be posting the recording. I just don't know where it would be, but we'll send out the link when it's available. Catherine Primus has a question, and she's curious about how much the transition to virtual studies is impacting the results. And as a layperson, it doesn't seem like it's a one-to-one comparison of pre-COVID versus post-COVID in terms of results. I don't know, is that Maurice, Robert? Is that resonate?
I would say, as Robert started off saying, there are many studies that we simply cannot do. So if you're running a taste testing study, if you're trying to do an eye tracking study, we can't do those things very easily in the virtual environment. There are some other, I think what I liked about Zab's presentation is that, hey, we're seeking to use, there's some advantages here, there's some opportunities where, yeah, once people are all on Zoom, we can now do facial coding, simultaneous facial coding, which was harder when we had 4 people around a table. So I think that there's some things that there are opportunities, but I think it's been a transition for us as a lab. I think it's been a transition for us as researchers to seize those opportunities and figure out how to overcome the drawbacks where I think still to me, I'm super salient. It's very salient to me what I cannot do. And I'm still in transition focusing on the opportunities. And that was part of what I was hoping to sort of do with this forum is sort of, think about those things and, learn from Barb and, Becky and Zab, and I sort of welcome other suggestions too.
All right.
I was also going to. I was just going to add that while I think the Wharton community is being innovative in this space, I think we're also seeing a lot of innovation in the development space too. And I think depending on timing, I just wanted to point out, for example, that Toby just launched, a new native using webcam-based eye tracking platform. It's called Sticky. We don't necessarily have or want a license to it, but I just wanted to use that as an example of the fact that that companies are also really innovating right now at this time because the corporate space has also gotten slowed down in marketing insights and all in corporate, innovations. But also people are still working on developing tools and software, et cetera. So there may also be opportunities for us to explore or test out new ideas that can still have really great application.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Uh, well, I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. The Wharton Behavioral Lab team, the whole team has been incredibly supportive and adaptive, and have been rolling with a lot of transition. And to the speakers, who are Robert and Alec and Zab, Barb, and Becky, thanks so much for being the sort of first to volunteer to share your insights. I'm eager. I mean, I've sort of just finished my first year at the Wharton Behavioral Lab, and I'm eager for feedback about what we could be doing even better, and for ideas about perhaps future forums or sort of opportunities to build our communities so we can exchange ideas, like the methods that I think so many of us could benefit from learning about what other people are doing. So I sort of welcome your feedback, and thank you so much for spending this time with us, and thanks to all the speakers.